Tornadoes in the South and Midwest. The Literary Digest, April 17, 1920. A 17-year-old boy was riding in an automobile along Milwaukee Avenue, Chicago, when the car encountered one of that group of related tornadoes which devastated parts of 8 southern and midwestern states on the last Sunday in March. "First, we were pelted with hailstones as big as pigeons' eggs," he said. "Then we were soaked in a deluge of rain. We saw a funnel-shaped cloud coming toward us and stopped the machine. Then the strangest sight I ever expect to see met our eyes." His account, which multiplied by several thousands might give a fair idea of the series of disasters brought by the wind, continues in the Chicago Tribune. "We saw shingles flying off roofs, chickens carried high up in the air. Telephone poles snapped off and went swirling off in a cloud of dust. Houses shook and collapsed. One of them seemed to fold right up. Another jumped up in the air and fell down all in pieces. Birds were flung down in the road with such force that their lives were crushed out. All this happened quicker than I can tell it. We were about to crawl out of the car when it began to rise. We jumped and the car turned over. We were both blown into a ditch and were soaking wet when we picked ourselves up. A repair car came along towing another light machine. The repair car didn't upset, but the other did. We helped those fellows right their machine, and they helped us with ours. While we were working, a house a short distance away burst into flames and was destroyed before firemen came. These freakish blasts would be amusing if they were not so wanton in dealing out death and destruction," observes the Providence, Rhode Island Evening Bulletin. "Their strange twists baffle imagination. The total of deaths, counted among the immediate results of this great storm, or more properly perhaps, combination of storms, approximates 200. Possibly 10,000 were injured, many seriously, and the property damage is counted in the millions of dollars. Within the space of a few hours, on a day which happened to be Palm Sunday, with the result that crowded churches imperiled an unusual number of persons, cyclonic storms followed frequently by fire or floods swept parts of Georgia, Alabama, Missouri, Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Henry J. Cox, weather forecaster for Chicago, places the responsibility for the widespread destruction on a combination of 2 great storms, according to a dispatch to the Philadelphia Record. One developed in Alaska, traveled through British Columbia, and joined a storm from the southwest, which developed in the arid plateaus of southern Arizona and Nevada. The resulting windstorms were among the most violent of any ever experienced in the afflicted regions. Illinois, and especially the suburbs of Chicago, was the hardest hit of the central states, with 30 dead, more than 1,000 injured, and 3,000 made homeless. Indiana reported 36 fatalities, and Ohio 26. 11 were killed in Michigan, and 1 each in Wisconsin and Missouri. The death list was placed at 38 in Georgia, and in Alabama at 17. These figures do not include reports from small out-of-the-way places, many of which were isolated by the destruction of telegraph and telephone wires, and by floods. Strange freaks of the wind, some of them tragic, many of them merely amazing or amusing, are reported from Chicago in a special dispatch to the New York Tribune. For instance, a frame was snatched from a picture on the wall, yet the glass was unbroken. 2 blocks west of one of the suburbs struck by the tornado, there is a house standing on its chimney, and 6 naked trees with their roots in the air. On the west road of this same suburb, there is a barn lying in a cornfield, and a flivver astride of a rail fence. One man who was dug from beneath a hummock of splinters and bricks said, when he regained consciousness, that he thought he had awakened someplace way below, where it was very hot. The rescuers found a stove on each side of him, which had been carried away from some neighboring houses. Both stoves were burning briskly. The tornado actually lasted 1 minute in Wilmette, but the citizens there insist that it lasted more than an hour. A trunk traveled from the garret of one house and landed in the front window of another. Lingerie from one town is draped on trees in another. One man held to a lamppost for 10 minutes while the wind straightened him out parallel with the ground. A minister in one church was saying, "Be prepared, for you know not when you will be called." The roof caved in, the steeple collapsed, and 2 women and a child were killed. A barn was lifted from 3 horses, but the animals were unharmed. 8 bodies had been found in Elgin. "Surely there must be more, a great many more," persons said. Rescue parties peered beneath fallen timbers, heaps of plaster, and piles of brick. Among the searchers was a photographer. In the business center, he found a mountain of debris. He observed it critically to learn from what side it might be photographed to the best advantage. He saw something that caused him to drop his camera. It was the body of a woman. He ran to the place and began throwing the splinters and bricks aside with his hands. "Call my paper and tell them that there are 9 dead in Elgin," he called to a reporter. The reporter hurried away. 9 dead in Elgin was passed around in odd whispers. The word was flashed to Chicago. When the body was uncovered, it was found to be badly damaged, and the wax features were disfigured. It was a clothing model. There is one building in Melrose Park which stands majestically and defiant while all around is prostrate. It was directly in the path of the gale. No freak of the storm saved this building. Through its sheer solidity, it withstood the tornado. It is a 2-story brick structure, and it was packed solid from cellar to roof with sacks of flour and feed. It was too heavy a load for the big wind to lift. $500,000 worth of fodder. A few bags of flour whisked out on the street, and the rain needed them to dough. That was all. The track of the twister winds in and out. Little wooden cottages are left standing, while great brick and stone structures nearby are razed. Sometimes the wind cut like a keen-edged sword. Sometimes it smote like a mailed fist. In Maywood, there's a house with its top shaven off clean. Next door is a dwelling which looks as if a crusher had landed on its roof and smashed it to splinters. Like twisted skeletons stand 3 houses in Melrose Park, possibly the hardest hit of all the suburbs. They look as if they had exploded. Their walls are blown out, and their roofs swept into the air. The schoolhouse looks as if some prehistoric monster had taken a few bites from it. Great chunks are missing. It is a curious path, this trail of the tornado. It is lined with the curious who stand by and wonder and ask each other how a wind could flatten out a brick house, strip its walls, and shoot the bricks like bullets 100 feet. One old woman who lived alone sat beside the spot where her house had stood, while past the idle and curious. Around her head was a towel, which showed several spots of red. She was an object of all photographers, and one picture of her pathetic figure in an afternoon paper was headed, "The Whole Story of the Tornado." It showed her with a few articles of furniture around her, articles that soldiers and others had found and brought back. She refused to leave the place of her desolation, and rocked continuously to and fro, mumbling incoherent words. The Chicago Tribune's account says that the storm came practically out of a clear sky, and departed to leave the same clear sky behind. The wind came into a peaceful, sunshiny, warm Palm Sunday, according to this account, and when it left, the day was peaceful and warm, and the sun was shining. A torrential downpour and a hailstorm, lasting for a few moments, intervened. In Melrose Park, a suburb of Chicago, a freight car containing 1,500 pounds of freight was lifted by the cyclonic force of the wind, carried a distance of 40 feet, and smashed against a depot, which was partly wrecked. A switch tower on top of a slender pole, standing 3 feet from the end of the car, was not touched by the blast. An account is given of the antics of the storm in Chicago proper, where the most remarkable feature of the wind's work, perhaps, was the amount of general destruction wrought without the sacrifice of any lives. The Tribune's account runs, "The storm made its first serious onslaught at 55th Street and Archer Avenue. In that district, the home of Charles Dobeck toppled over like a house of cards. Mr. Dobeck and his daughter Olga suffered cuts and bruises. Sweeping north in Archer Avenue in a half-mile path, the storm razed sheds and frame dwellings. Descending whirlwind fashion, it lifted the roof from a 2-story apartment building and hurled it against the home of Henry Hart, member of the city fire department. No one was injured. Then it divided into sections, one traveling west in 31st Street to register at Cicero, Maywood, and Melrose Park to the northwest, but the main section traveling toward the northeast to strike hard around 72nd Avenue and Irving Park Boulevard. Meanwhile, still another section was skip-stopping about the southwest side. Reaching 22nd Street and Crawford Avenue, it smashed its way to Ogden Avenue, in which it traveled northeast in a quarter-mile path to Turner Avenue, where it shifted to the north. Down Turner to 16th Street, where it attained its greatest fury, then on to 15th Street, in which it hopped east to unroof a house used as a Jewish club. No one was injured. From here, it leapt across Douglas Park, uprooting a few trees and shrubbery, to register again as a house-wrecking medium in Taylor Street, between Sacramento Boulevard and Francisco Avenue. From the town of West Point, Georgia, which, together with the neighboring town of LaGrange, was a heavy sufferer by the storm, comes a brief report of a physician who gave his life in an effort to save the life of a child. The incident is thus reported by the Atlanta Constitution. In company with half a dozen others, Dr. L.D. Askew was chatting in his drugstore in West Point when the scream that announced the tornado was heard. Everyone sought safety outside, leaving unnoticed in the store a little boy who had been listening to the conversation. That is, all but Dr. Askew. He saw the child even as the building rocked and quivered, and, reaching down, gathered the boy in his arms and made a move toward the door, bending over the child to protect it. Horrified lookers-on saw the roof collapse, and the two go out of sight beneath the debris. The storm passed in a few moments, and a child's screams were heard. When the wreckage was removed, Dr. Askew was dead, but virtually unhurt, protected by his body, was the boy. That's why West Point mourns a hero today. The same paper presents this story of conditions in LaGrange on the morning after the storm. While scores of her mill workers and colored residents were suffering silently in emergency hospitals, from which were all day being issued the bodies of the dead, while hundreds were homeless and in desolation, and while property owners took inventory after a loss estimated at from $1 million to $1,225,000, LaGrange was today bathed in the soft radiance of early summer sunshine and wrapped in quiet that seemed to give the lie to the news that Sunday afternoon the city was in the grip of a disastrous tornado that left hundreds of homes twisted and torn beyond recognition and took a toll of death and suffering. The loss sustained by the mill workers here is a particularly pathetic one when compared with the losses of people who are better fitted to repair the gap in resources left by the cyclone, and some of the most pitiful scenes ever witnessed in Georgia were witnessed today. Last night and today, the Dunson and the Mission House hospitals were crowded with the white injured, while the Troup County Courthouse and a Negro schoolhouse were converted into emergency receiving stations for colored sufferers. The Red Cross convoy of doctors, nurses, and hospital supplies that fought its way from Atlanta over seas of almost impassable mud and reached here at 10:30 o'clock this morning after a ride of 10 hours, found the stricken city in dire need, and in less than 15 minutes, Atlanta's Red Cross nurses were assisting Atlanta's Red Cross doctors in operating on LaGrange's sufferers. Despite the fact that Red Cross relief is being administered in just as generous style as is possible under the circumstances, suffering in LaGrange's Mill District, where almost all the white casualties were incurred, is intense. Supplies of all kinds were being rushed to LaGrange tonight, and it is believed that with the aid of certain supplies, in a short time, the city will be able to care for its wounded, house its homeless, and alleviate want and privation. Several hundred homes of white employees of the various mills here, and of Negro residents, were torn from their foundations, and either dashed to pieces some distance away, or twisted into unrecognizable masses and left standing in part, by some freak of the wind. The devastation wrought by the cyclone as it cut a broad swath directly across the southern edge of the city is gruesome. Acres upon acres of leveled buildings, and pile upon pile of torn and twisted wreckage cover the slopes of the broad-breasted hills in the path of the tornado. In one place, a number of Negro houses were burned after being blown down. The Albany Journal suggests that these widespread and severe storms, which usually are of limited scope and do not occur simultaneously in widely separated localities, may have some connection with recent disturbances in the sun. As the writer sums up his idea of the matter, storms of such extent and violence, coming right after announcement of the discovery of 2 large sunspots and a number of smaller ones, which followed the remarkable display of northern lights last week, support the theory that disturbances in the sun, whose effect appears in the form of what are called spots, have a direct and decided influence upon our atmospheric conditions. The Nashville Star is among the many newspapers which believe that nature is out of order, and that more such twisters may be expected. It comments editorially, "When, a short time ago, a tornado swept through western Missouri and destroyed several lives and much property, fears were expressed that this visitation, thus early in the spring, denoted the possibility of other serious cyclonic storms this season. This apprehension has been verified by an outburst of fury in a wide range of territory yesterday. In half a dozen states, Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Georgia, and Alabama, a series of storms, perhaps the result of the same atmospheric condition, wrought disaster. The death toll is not yet fully reckoned and reported. The property loss, mounting surely into the millions, will perhaps not be known for weeks. This is a remarkable happening. Usually such storms are restricted in their fury and cover but a small area. Here was a combination of storms ranging over several thousand miles in space, though greatly concentrated in certain parts. If it were in midsummer, there might be no great wonderment at the phenomenon. But coming now, so early in the season, the visitation is greatly disturbing, apart from the loss and suffering entailed. It suggests that nature is out of order, that there are extraordinary forces at work to disturb the seasonal rhythm, and that other terrors of the air are in store for the people. The worst of such happenings is that there is no possibility of precaution against them. Man can build seawalls to keep out floods and dikes to check high waters, but when the whirling winds come, there is no protection. The stoutest buildings are crushed, and the heaviest materials are hurled far. The force that will carry a great church bell 100 feet, as in Illinois, is not to be resisted by any preventive measures. Professor Willis L. Moore, the Philadelphia Public Ledger recalls, once declared that the people of the Ohio Valley and the Lake region, by reason of the turbulence of the general aerial circulation, and of New England in particular, because all eastward moving storm centers sooner or later converge over the main coast, had acquired more lively habits of body and mind than their European forebears. He was supposed to have uttered a jest and not a serious scientific fact.